go ahead and take it away.
All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go full screen here. And Mike is going to start us off.
Yeah, hi everyone. So we're here today to update you about the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge project. The focus for this briefing is about some cost-saving studies we're exploring. So we'd love to share those with you tonight and hear what you think about them. There's three main cost-saving ideas we're going to share. Just a quick refresher, I think we've talked with you all before about this project. The whole Pacific Northwest is very overdue for a major earthquake. This slide shows the frequency of very large earthquakes, some of the largest in the planet. The blue lines, this is 10,000 years of time at the bottom. Every blue line represents a 9.0 earthquake. The orange lines represent an 8.0 earthquake. And just for comparison, you know, like the Fukushima earthquake, I think would be like around an 8.0. The San Francisco earthquake in '89 that I was in, I think was in the more in the below 8, like high 6 or so. So we're overdue. The more time goes on that we don't have it, it's, you know, good in some ways, but we're the pressure is building up offshore, and now the geologists say it's about a 1 in 3 chance the earthquake will happen in our lifetime. So we're not ready. Next slide. So this slide was sort of designed to answer the question, well, why are we focused on the Burnside Bridge? And it is because this map shows the lifeline routes that ODOT and Metro established about 4 decades ago. And these routes include the major freeways in the area and some of the major roads. Some of them are old state highways like, you know, 82nd Avenue. But Burnside Road is one of the lifeline routes. These are priority routes to be kept in service, kept in, you know, usable in an emergency, such as an earthquake. And Burnside is the only road that has a county, pardon me, only the Burnside Bridge of all the county bridges is on a lifeline route. So after replacing the Selwood Bridge a few years ago, it was a discussion point at the county, which bridge should we focus on next? And knowing that none of our downtown bridges are built to survive this massive earthquake we're expecting, our board decided to focus on our one bridge that's on a lifeline route. Before we leave this slide, I just want to point out the little red circles on the map represent seismically vulnerable structures, such as freeway overpasses and bridges that were designed before the risk of earthquakes was known. And if you look at Burnside Road, it has very few of those little red circles. Probably the most important one is the Burnside Bridge. And so this project would take care of that. If we take care of that problem, you know, we'll be working with our friends at the city to see if they can address the 2 little red dots you see up in the West Hills. Those are some short tunnels that Burnside travels under in the West Hills that are not up to seismic standards. But with these projects, we could really make this route very resilient in an earthquake and have at least one east-west river crossing in the central part of our region that we could count on. Next.
Mike?
Yes, Linda?
How, on the 2 bridges on Foster, the green one was done many, many years ago, and the red one was done recently. Is that accurate? That one is good and one is not?
That's a great question, Linda. We'll have to make sure our map is up to date. I think if we can maybe you could put your email in the chat and we could get back to you. This map's about 3 years old, and I'm not aware of a project on Foster Road, but we should check that out. And if there's a red dot that we should change to green, that's a great comment, and we'll follow up on that. So you're saying, when you say the Foster Road red dot that says, is that the one that's
At Barbara Welch.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Cassie. If we could note that, we'll check that out, and we could get back to Bryan or Doug or Linda to let them know. But this map was created about 3 years ago. Thanks, Linda. Okay, next slide. 3 main goals of this project. Top goal, have a bridge that is usable the day of the big earthquake. And those words are important because we have other bridges such as the Tillicum, which is a recent bridge, you know, built with modern seismic code. But that bridge, while the bridge is expected to still be standing, the approaches on land to the bridge are expected to settle in a big earthquake and have some sinking. And it would take probably weeks for that bridge to be usable after the earthquake. So with Burnside, we want to make sure the day of the big one that it's usable. After the earthquake, we want to have a bridge we can count on to help our region recover and make sure that people don't leave the region, including employers. Finally, if we're lucky and the earthquake doesn't happen in our lifetime, the Burnside Bridge today is 95 years old, and we believe it needs a major upgrade if we're to get another 100 years out of the bridge. And we're kind of pivoting to it as our next major project at the county. Next slide, please. So we're here tonight because of some money issues. We have some financial challenges for this project, and county leaders asked us to seek ways to reduce the project cost in order to make it more likely the project can be funded and then built. So why is that? Last November, there was a regional ballot measure that would have funded a number of transportation projects, including this project, pardon me. That measure failed. If that measure had passed, we would have received $150 million from that bond measure, pardon me. Secondly, there's a number of other large infrastructure projects in our region that are all seeking funds from the same sources. Those include the Rose Quarter I-5 project, the I-5 replacement project, the bridge over the Columbia River on I-5, possibly the TriMet Southwest Corridor Light Rail project. So we're all these very large projects, all seeking money from the same state and federal sources. So we have a lot of competition. The lower the price of our project, the more likely we can close our funding gap. The third one we hope is temporary, but we're not sure. Because of the COVID pandemic, the price of everything, including labor, has soared. If we were to build this new Burnside Bridge today at current prices for steel and concrete and labor, it'd be over $1 billion. And our leaders tell us we can't find that much money. We got to reduce the cost somehow. So we're here tonight to tell you some ideas about how to do that. The county still believes this is the right time to do this project. Our whole transportation team is focused on it. And we think that finding some cost-saving refinements is going to make it more likely we can actually accomplish the project. We don't want to end up just as a nice plan on a shelf that doesn't ever get built. Next slide, please. So in order to find some cost savings, we're going to take a little bit more time. If it hadn't been for this cost issue, we would have probably been heading into the design phase, maybe late this year. But we're taking about a year of extra time to really look for ways to maybe bring the cost down by like $200 million. That would be, that's a pretty achievable goal, we think. And that will be time well spent if we can push the cost down and also maybe leave some time for the COVID price spikes to ease. And also we need more time to find all the money we still need. We only have about 300 million. And as I mentioned, if we had to build it today, it would be around 1 billion. We'd like to get it down into that $700 to $800 million range. Still about 4 years away from construction. So it's not going to be built tomorrow. And when we start building it, it'll take about 4 to 5 years. So maybe when Doug is retired and can visit, we'll have a bridge for him to be at the ribbon cutting. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to get into the ideas for cost savings. Next slide, please. So whenever you address sort of a budget cutting situation, it's good to decide, okay, what's so important we don't want to cut it. These are kind of like our sacred cow issues, to coin a phrase there. So one thing that people may be wondering is, well, did you choose the right option? Is there another option that would be cheaper than the one we've chosen? And what we can tell you is we think we've got the cheapest option for making this bridge earthquake ready. To fix the old bridge actually costs a lot more money, maybe 15 to 20% more than creating an entirely new bridge. That's largely due to the fact that the current bridge has so many columns in the ground, and each one of those columns, you have to go deep, deep under this ground and fortify them to make the bridge stand. So a long span replacement bridge will have very few columns, hardly any in the liquefiable area, and that really brings the cost down. So we think we have the right option. It's about the size and some of the other aspects of it that we think we can lower the cost. Secondly, we don't want to sacrifice the seismic resiliency or the seismic design of the bridge. We could actually lower the cost if we said, okay, this bridge will be earthquake ready, but like the Tillicum crossing, it might be a week or two before you can use it. We don't want to go that route. We want to be able to tell the community, this is the bridge that will be usable after this massive earthquake. It has 4 minutes of shaking strikes our region. So our leaders said we want to stick to that. That's got to be our promise to the public. If we can do that, then these other bullets kind of take care of themselves. We'll be there for first responders. We'll be there to help the region recover and have a bridge in use while the others are fixed or replaced. And also we'll have a bridge that meets our needs for the next century. Finally, as we look for ways to save money, we don't want to cut things that help those who have the least among us or have the least power. An example of that might be people with disabilities. We want to make sure that people with disabilities can fully use this bridge. In my experience, this bridge probably has more people on the sidewalks with disabilities than any of our other bridges. There's a number of social service agencies clustered around, especially the west end of the bridge. And because of that, it's very important for people who are wheelchairs, et cetera. Next slide, please. So this slide, there's a lot of little text here, but I'll just kind of hit the highlights. At the far right, those are the cost ranges for the 3 big cost-saving ideas we want to share with you tonight. At the bottom where it says TBD, that is a cost-saving decision we're going to postpone until we hire the company that's going to actually build the bridge. That is about what type of structure we have at the east end of the bridge, over the highway, the freeway, over the East Bank Esplanade. It's by far the most technically challenging part of the project. It's a really long span. It's built over an active freeway. And we think when we know the company that's going to build it, they can help us choose the safest and the lowest cost structure type. So that leaves us with these other 3 items, which we're going to go to in more detail. It's really about the bridge width and about 2 of the structure types for 2 sections of the new bridge. I'll tell you up front that the structure types, we have very broad consensus. Everybody we talk to seems very in favor of these 2 recommendations on the structure types. The one that has more division about what people think is making the bridge narrower, and we'll want to hear from you tonight about that. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to start with the structure types, starting at the west end of the bridge. Thanks, Cassie. So this slide kind of shows, you can think about the new Burnside Bridge as sort of 3 sections. And we're recommending tonight the types of structure types we would have at the west end going into downtown, that's shown in blue, about 450 feet long. We also have a recommendation for you tonight about the movable span that's shown in the darker color over the center. And as I mentioned before, we'd like to delay a decision on the really long east approach to the bridge until we have the contractor on board. So move away, we'll be talking to you about that probably in late 2022. So Cassie, we'll go to the next slide and tell them about the west end. So first of all, this slide kind of summarizes what a long span replacement bridge could look like. And at the on the left, you see some examples of the different types of structures you could use to have a new long span bridge. We say long span, not that the bridge itself is longer. It'll still start at MLK on the east, 2nd Avenue on the west, but there's fewer spans and those spans are longer. And that saves us a lot of money and reduces the risk because we're not building in the soil that's going to flow towards the river in the big earthquake. So where we do have to work in the area like that, we'll go all the way to bedrock and build really big foundations to make them stable. This slide on the right are sort of examples of modern examples of these like arches and the cable stay and then a girder at the lower one. So we'll get into some more details coming up. Starting with the west end of the bridge. This is what it looks like today. This is where Saturday Market sets up. We're in Waterfront Park looking north at the bridge. And you'll notice there's kind of like a forest of columns. And that's one reason why it would be so expensive to try to save and fix this old bridge. You've got to go, over 100 feet below each one of those columns. And there's like 30 in that picture, and make them stable to survive an earthquake. So what we're recommending is a newer version of this girder type. And this is what it might look like. This is not a final design. So just think of it as a shape that is roughly the shape we're talking about. So what does it mean? We have 2 sets of columns where there would have been 5 with the current bridge. We actually have a little bit more height under the bridge, and we have nothing above the bridge. The combination of all this means that this is $20 to $40 million less than if we had an arch structure here or like a Tillicum crossing style cable stayed structure. And what we've learned this year is there are regulatory agencies and we need their approval for building this bridge. And they tell us that we like this option that we're all looking at here, because if you had a high bridge here with an arch or cable towers, it would sort of block the views of this National Historic District. They call Old Town for a reason. It's the oldest part of the city, and it actually is on the National Historic Register. So this is, it's also very open. So if you like a view as you're coming into downtown or leaving downtown, this preserves that kind of open view. And basically, stakeholder groups have been very receptive to it. We'll be interested to hear what you say tonight. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to the center span, the movable span over the river. This slide shows even today, as we hope to in Portland, communities are building modern movable bridges. On the left is a lift bridge in France, and examples of lift bridges in Portland would be the Hawthorne and the steel bridges. And on the right is the new Woodrow Wilson Bridge in Washington, D.C. It is what we call a bascule, which is a fancy French word that means that the ends rotate up. And so there's kind of an infinite amount of vertical clearance once the bridge opens up. The Burnside and the Morrison bridges are bascule bridges in Portland. Next slide, please. For reference, there's our Burnside Bridge today, looking at that center movable span, which is a bascule span. And next slide. So I'm now going to show you a series of illustrations of what a new Burnside Bridge could look like if we change the type of movable span, shown here as the bascule, in combination with the different types of structures we're looking at for the east side. This one shows the bascule in the center with the arch at the east side. And then Cassie will move forward. And this is what it could look like if we had the vertical lift with the arch. And most people, when they see this, say, ugh, not that, it's a lot going on there. And next slide. This is what the bascule could look like with the cable stay. So you'd have these 2 tall towers on the east side, kind of to the east of the freeway. And then Cassie will show the next one with the vertical lift. And I'd be the first to acknowledge that, you could, with some architect's time, maybe refine these shapes a bit, but it basically needs to be, those towers need to be that big for the vertical bridge to operate. They have to have huge concrete counterweights in order to lift the drawbridge up for ships. So, and the bottom line, moving on, is that the bascule, which preserves the views of downtown, and as you're leaving downtown, it kind of preserves the views looking to the east and north and south up the river. It's actually cheaper. Isn't that good? I think that's we're lucking out here because we haven't found anybody who really prefers the vertical to the bascule span. So also easier to get permission from the regulatory agencies to get it built. Okay, and next slide, Cassie. So examples of how it could look. And then the point of this slide is that we'll be coming back to you during the design phase to get input once we have the contractor on board about the structure type for the east end of the bridge. At this point, I think I'm going to hand it over to Cassie and take a sip of water.
Thanks, Mike, for bearing your voice. Right, Mike's been doing a lot of these briefings lately. So to talk a little bit about the bridge width, now this, as Mike mentioned earlier, is really where we realize the greatest cost savings. So when you build something bigger, you've got more materials, more costs, construction. So the bigger it is, the more expensive it is. So when we first went out and identified our range of alternatives, we thought we could widen the bridge. So our initial preferred alternative had widened the bridge. Last time we came to you, we talked about how the bridge currently narrows. It's like an hourglass in the middle. So we just thought, well, let's leave the ends the same where they connect into the city, but we'd widen that middle section. Well, as we're looking to save cost, we thought, well, let's, maybe we're a little greedy at first, kind of really reaching to see wherever we could add space. And actually go ahead and build something back to roughly the same width as the existing bridge. So we decided, as part of the cost saving measures, to actually revise the preferred alternative to really be back towards a width that's closer to what it is today. What you'll see here in the top two, which is the initial preferred alternative here with the 5 lanes and nice wide facilities. And then the second, with the existing with the 5 lanes, is that with our refined cross section, we would actually remove one of the vehicle lanes. So going from 5 lanes to 4 lanes, reallocating some of that space to be provided so that we could build that crash-worthy barrier and provide more safety and comfort for bikes and peds. So Mike talked earlier a little bit about some of those guiding principles that were established early on to help us really identify what we would be willing to forego as we looked at cost savings. And that crash-worthy barrier is really something that we want to maintain and keep within our final design. So that remains, but we did have to reduce our cross-section from 5 to 4. So we did study traffic when we looked at this. We thought initially, when we did the maintenance project a number of years back, during construction, we actually took away a lane. So we were living with 4 lanes. And it wasn't Carmageddon. So we thought, okay, well, this is still, we think that we could still probably build this. Not a super high traffic bridge of the many other downtown bridges. But we did go out and do that traffic analysis. Before I go into the analysis, this is a quick shot on that refined cross section. So here's the 4 lanes, including the bus only lane as is there today. Today, there is an existing eastbound bus only lane. There's not one coming down the west direction that's has been studied, is being studied right now by the city. There's been challenges bringing that from 7th down to the bridge. So that hasn't been established as a future item, but as it is today, we want to maintain that bus only lane in the eastbound direction, and then seek traffic configurations for the remaining 3 lanes, single occupancy lanes, and then building out those facilities. Right now, it's about 12.8 for bike ped width. Today, we would build that out to being anywhere from 14 to 17 feet. We still want to design that, but that's where the refined cross section stands. So that's an example. The traffic options that we studied here, there's 4 key options we studied. The first one here is a balanced option where we've really just said 2 lanes going eastbound, 2 lanes going west. But what you have is we still have that eastbound bus only. So you really just have the 1 single occupancy vehicle lane going east and then 2 west. What we realize is that a lot more people commute out of the city in the evening going eastbound than any other time of day. And most people actually kind of divide up the bridge that they take in the morning. So we're not a high amount of traffic over the Burnside Bridge in the morning, but more people are heading out of the city using Burnside Bridge. So this resulted in a pretty high traffic congestion going out of the city in peak evening times. The second option, we looked at putting a focus on the eastbound. As mentioned, a lot more people heading out towards East Portland in the evening time. So we thought, well, let's give them that lane. And what we realized is coming for the folks coming westbound in the morning, well, yeah, now they don't have that extra lane. So it was a little more congested there, and for buses moving westbound in the morning. Then we looked at a reversible lane and we realized, wow, this is looking to have roughly about the same amount of traffic as today. So what this would do is it would take that center lane and it would provide a priority for folks coming west. So it would be dedicated westbound in the morning for the morning commute times. And then in the evening and all other times of the day, because a lot more people leave using Burnside, it would switch and it would just be going eastbound. So then you would get that those two single occupancy lanes going eastbound along with the bus. That ended up being the best of the four options, studying, looking roughly about what we have going on for traffic today. And I'll tell you a little bit about reversible lanes in just a moment. I have a slide to sort of talk a little bit about that. I do see Doug's hand.
Yeah, thank you, Cassie. I hate to break up your role here,
Yeah.
but while we're on this particular slide, I have a question for all of the parties that are here. Have you explored taking away bike and pedestrian off one side and expanding bike on one side to a contraflow bike lane? You could significantly increase the amount of space you have to play with there by just taking that option off one side and just driving it to one specific side. Specifically because there are traffic lights currently at both sides of the bridge, that makes it an easy cross point for anybody coming or going. It would be a minor inconvenience to cross Burnside on either one spot or the other, but there are currently traffic lights there. So I'm interested. It looks like, if you expanded one side by 5 feet, you'd have 10.5 feet to play with in expanded space on any one of these options that you could maybe widen specific traffic lanes or widen a bus lane a little bit. Have you explored that at all?
Yeah, we have. Mike, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I'll answer, and Cassie, fill in if I forget anything. Yes, Doug, we did look at that. One challenge of the Burnside compared to some of our other bridges is that it's actually built into the neighborhoods so that there's a number of businesses that have doors onto the bridge. And they're both on the north and the south side. So we would have to have a way for the sidewalk to remain open for them to still get to their front door. Think of like the rescue mission, or there's the Templeton building on the south side of the bridge. Saturday Market might not be there permanently on the west side, but so that presents some challenges. We've heard from users that they would prefer to have a side that allows them to not have to change the side at the end of the bridge. But you're right, if you could neck it down in the middle of the bridge over the river, that would be a way to reduce width and maybe have more width for another lane or something. So we'll put that down as a comment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good thought. One that we hear come up a bit. So the last option here that we studied was to remove the bus only lane and to have the 2 lanes, single occupancy vehicle lanes in both directions, which is what's out there today, just now no longer having that dedicated eastbound bus only. And this next slide sort of shows what we would do for that bus only if we took it away, is that we would provide for at least queue jumps on each end of the bridge. That sort of builds out a lane to allow for buses to come down once they start approaching the ends of the bridge where the intersections are, and then they would have a signal, priority signal at that intersection so that they could go ahead of the single occupancy vehicles there. This is not our preferred option. It actually ends up being more expensive. You have to do more widening and work towards the ends of the bridge to allow that to happen. It's also a big community and city value to improve our transit and allow for more access to transit and improved use and operation. So it's something we studied. It's not necessarily our favorite. The reversible lane is really looking like the best of both worlds. And it has been done before in not in Oregon, but in other states quite well. This is an example, a visual of a reversible lane in Vancouver, BC. And we're studying different ways we could do it. You can do it with signs, gates, signals, striping. It's been done very successfully in other places. So we are still studying what that could be. So the big cost savings here with the bridge width, like Mike said, not everyone is a big fan of losing that lane, of reducing the width. But really is our biggest cost saving items. Combined with the bridge types, we're looking at nearly $200 million in savings, which could really make or break a project like this to really go forward, be able to be funded and not sit on a shelf. We really are in high need to make sure that we have a bridge in downtown Portland immediately usable after that major earthquake. We don't have any right now. And it's on a major key lifeline route connecting Washington County to Gresham, major thoroughfare and lifeline connection. So we're hoping that people are open to the cost saving refinements, but we really want to hear what the community has to say. So we are out in the public with an online open house. We're doing briefings like this. We will have that survey open till about mid-December. We are going to have an online webinar with a presentation very similar to this. So in case others didn't get all that they wanted out of this or wanted to share the opportunity with others, we will have that on December 1st at 5. You can find more about that on the project website or where the online survey is, which is burnsidebridge.participate.online. And I will follow up with that link following this meeting. And so the very last slide here is sort of next steps. So we are here November, December, sharing our recommendations, seeking community input. We will then share that feedback with our community task force, who will then put forth a recommendation to our policy group. So lots of process and decision-making details here, but then to our policy group, and then ultimately to the Board of County Commissioners to look to support the refinement of the preferred alternative. All this is packaged up into a very technical document called the Supplemental Draft Environmental Impact Statement. And that documents all the nitty-gritty about all that we studied, all the impacts, the mitigation that we'll pursue, and then we can finalize that and move into final design in 2022. So thank you so much. I know this was a long one, but it's a big project. It's the biggest one of the county's transportation right now, that they're really on the charge to build a resilient Burnside Bridge. So I'll stop there and open for questions.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Mike. Well, I'm gonna open up the questioning. I have a couple questions in relation, not necessarily to the bridge, but to the surrounding areas and the seismic zones that have all both, well, specifically the fault zones. I believe one's on 32nd on the east side, and we know of a fault line running through the West Hills that would cross the current tunnels that we have. What kind of funding are we looking at to bolster these areas so we have a great bridge, but nobody can get to it because everything is collapsed around it? I realize that the funding here is specifically for the bridge, but are we bringing in a wider conversation with the county and city to bolster these other areas? Mike?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one, Doug. Thanks. I guess the short answer, Doug, is that it's not as coordinated as we would hope, but it is coordinated. And this project that we're talking with you about tonight has helped kind of make other agencies see what else is needed, like what would be a logical next step. There's a group called our Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization. I think it's the 5 metro area counties. And they are relooking at the lifeline routes with a close eye, sort of like our friend Linda here, who said, what is the next, if the county can fix the bridge, what's the next link in the chain that needs to be strong? We didn't mention ODOT much tonight, but ODOT is focused on I-205. And that's one reason why you see Multnomah County here and not ODOT, because ODOT sort of has their hands full getting I-205 ready. I would say that if this project moves forward, and as we mentioned, it's a very expensive project. We're talking 700 to 800 million would be my guess when we're all done with the cost saving. I think our colleagues at PBOT, we would work with them to try to make those little bridges up in the West Hills a priority for getting some grants and so we'd have a strong chain on this lifeline route across the region. I'm not as familiar with the seismic problem in the 30th Avenue area. Is that on the east side you're talking about?
Yeah, the east side. It's
Yeah.
between 28th and 32nd. That was identified as a fault line probably a decade ago.
Mhm.
And then it got really quiet after that. Nobody talked about it, but it's still there. Yeah.
That was,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, yes, you're totally right, Doug, and that was taken into some of our seismic resiliency tasks working group when we really started to assess what kind of standard should we be building this to. Is it just the Cascadia subduction zone? Is it that we expect? Is it the one in the center of the city? So really taking into account the multiple earthquakes that we could encounter and the size and magnitude of them.
I would say that I've studied what our local governments do, and there is a lot of leveraging of investments. Like you build a convention center and that leads to a max line, and you build, so I think the investment that we're talking about here would leverage, and I think our county commissioners and our city councilors, I think, would see the logic in what Doug's talking about. Like if we're going to spend all this money on the bridge, we should make sure that the whole lifeline route that we're working on is resilient. And I know Connie has talked about like, where's PBOT's fleet? Where are the trucks that are going to come out and move the debris around? We want to have all this be coordinated. And our region, is more and more focused on earthquakes as well as, fire risk, as well as another big challenge that global warming is bringing us.
Do you have a question?
I have a question.
Arlene has a question.
In the design that you presented for the undercarriage of the bridge, the ones that go into the streets on both the east and west side, that I find really problematic because number one, it's dark. Number two, it has a large span where people do things like steal bicycles and hit people and all this kind of stuff. There is no way that affords that kind of safety if you're expecting people to cross. That hasn't been addressed. When ODOT built the 205, a feeder tunnel, and that has been very problematic. And I see that as something similar happening. If you look at the undercarriage at Division and Powell, all of those have issues. Is there some way to make sure that that becomes not a breeding ground for less than stellar behavior, but can accommodate ordinary people using it to get across?
So great question, Arlene. I want to make sure I understand. So I think lighting would be one thing to address your concern. And also there's this thing called CEPTED, which I think stands for community or environment. It's basically designing spaces to feel more safe and to lower the crime rate. And one of those is visibility and not having a lot of columns that people can lurk behind. So I think a bridge that has fewer columns, as this one would have a more open feeling underneath. And I think people passing underneath the bridge would feel safer. But I think another thing you're probably talking about is lighting. You mentioned it being dark, and lighting is under a bridge is a very low cost thing that should be, part of the design. Is there something besides lighting and the not having too many columns that would make it feel safer to you?
The bollards and stuff that allow people to cross need to be a lot more defined, because they get knocked down, knocked over. I mean, the ones that we have now that are supposed to make the crossing into getting into the turning lane better, they put them all in recently, and I've already seen 3 or 4 of them that just got mowed over.
Oh,
So
these
how
are
do we get?
these are the
Yeah.
plastic candlesticks. Okay,
Yeah.
now I understand. So there's, as Arlene said, the current Burnside Bridge has what we call kind of plastic candlesticks, and they're just a visual divider. They wouldn't stop a car or a bicycle really, but they're on a dark night, on a rainy day, they make it easier for a driver to see where the edge of the lane is and not to stray into the bicycle lane, which is just inches away from the traffic lane. The new bridge, as we showed in the drawings, would have a crash-worthy barrier, something that would be low but would stop a vehicle where if a driver has a heart attack, something that the car is not going to go into the bike lane and the sidewalk. So does that address your concern?
As long as I would like to see the execution of it,
Okay.
because right now it's basically theoretical. And
Well, I agree. Yeah,
we actually have to see it in action.
I do appreciate someone who says, show me the details, Arlene. I can tell you that we've been in audiences where they say, boy, you could get a couple more feet for traffic and bikes if you just took out those crash-worthy barriers. But our county leaders actually heard so many requests for the crash-worthy barrier after there was a death of a pedestrian on the bridge struck by a vehicle, that they said, we're gonna do those crash-worthy barriers. We're also gonna lower the speed limit to 25 miles an hour. We just got it down from 35 to 30. And when this new bridge is built, they want to lower it to 25. And it's really to make it a safer. And it's not a freeway. Burnside Street, I think, is 25. So it would match that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. David, I'll get to your comment in the chat in just a second. Robin Castro, you were a late joiner, but I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm glad I was able to join this meeting, because I actually submitted public comment on the draft EIS of this Burnside Bridge project back in March. So I was lucky enough to read the draft environmental impact statement. And so just from what you're showing of moving forward with the alternatives, I personally, just at first glance, I'm really thinking I like where you're going with, like, the first alternative with keeping the bike lane and then going down and then like changing the other 2 lanes. But I just wanted to say that I think it's really important that we keep the bus lane specifically, especially as we're transitioning to a different how we commute the city differently, especially as we address climate change. And I also think that I wonder, perhaps a non-reversible lane would further promote that use of people using the bus to get into the city center. And yeah, I think the report the draft environmental impact statement had said that like 35,000 vehicle trips every day and 3,000 pedestrian and bike daily trips. And so it's definitely important that we keep the bike lanes and the pedestrian lanes on both sides, because we're weirdly planning for everyday traffic while on the top of that, thinking about in a catastrophe, are these lanes going to be used in the same way that they are just every Monday through Friday, you know? So I just wanted to say thank you. I currently believe I support the current proposal, and I'm definitely going to submit my testimony, I think, before the December 1st deadline. So thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, there's an online open house that opened yesterday, and that's a great way to share your comments. And then Robin was one of the few people that read the big report we had earlier this year. That's a bigger reading assignment, and we'll have a publication like that next spring, which is another opportunity for public comment. But the online open house is probably about a 10 to 15 minute kind of experience to get through that.
Right. And David had a comment, and it's a really good point. If there is a major earthquake, assume the power will go out. So you need to maximize natural lighting under the bridge. And to that, I'd kind of like to expand. If you could have a design element that would have, well, kind of like those driveway pull-out concave mirrors, if you could kind of build something like that into it that provides a natural focal point to spread out sunlight under the bridge, if that could be a design element. Not necessarily something used for vision, but just to promote natural lighting.
That's the first time we've heard that one, Doug. That's interesting. I'll share that with our design team. That's kind of a detail we get into in final design, but it's an interesting. I think having fewer columns, which this bridge would be one way to reduce the shadows that come with all that extra structure.
Okay, and I'm looking through here. David, you had a question.
So on the reversible lanes, I will point out that on coastal areas in the Gulf Coast especially, but also on the East Coast, most of the highway bridges have reversible lanes because of emergency evacuation routes. So they are actually pretty common in certain parts of the country. Also in Vancouver, your example from the Lionsgate Bridge is very good, but I would also take a look at Highway 99, which is I think called Granville, that goes through the main part of the city, and that also has reversible lanes. And they work quite well. I mean, most drivers, especially in an emergency or in heavy traffic on a daily routine, if they're moving at 25 miles per hour, the reversible lanes work really well. It's when they're driving at 55 that they don't work so well.
I think, yeah, David's right on there. I think the risk of a head-on collision at 55 compared to 25 mile an hour speed limit is a lot worse. So
yeah, so they work a lot better in congested traffic than they do on a highway.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, I see Carol has her hand up.
Carol.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment on that. You could have some maybe curbs between the lanes or something to keep people from changing lanes once they get on the bridge. And that would, tend to reduce the number of accidents from people trying to change lanes, and, when you've got reverse flow going.
Thanks, Carol. Does anybody have a comment about the two structure types? We've noticed that I think Cassie and I have done about 10 of these presentations and hardly ever get a comment about those. So that tells me that people don't have strong feelings or are okay with the recommendations.
I personally, I like the very first one, the bascule that has the arch.
Mhm.
I tend to shy away from the cable structures because they've proven to be problematic in high earthquake areas. If you get torquing one way or the other, those cables snap and then your entire structure is gone. Whereas the archway kind of spreads that stress out over the entire length of the archway. The columns in the center with the concrete counterweights, that's too much visually going on, and it you know, frankly looks hideous. And it's not historically what we have now, which is a low impact little towers right there. You've got these monstrous columns in the middle of the bridge, and it just, you know, visually not very appealing.
I think I'm with you, Doug. Interested to hear others, but yeah, when you first see Portland and you see the hawthorn or the steel, they kind of take your breath away. They're so tall. But then if you know, we grew up with them here, but if you were to just replace a low bridge with a really, really high bridge in the center of the city, it's it would take some getting used to.
Right. Yeah.
Well-
Anybody else want to pile in with their choice comment? Go right ahead. Carol, go ahead.
I don't think the pylons would be so hideous if there wasn't another structure right next to it. But if you're going to do the arch or the cable stayed bit on the east end, you know, having the counterweighted bridge is just not a. They conflict. The design elements conflict.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, well, I know that Bryan is eagerly waiting to go on next, so I think we've got some great comments, and we appreciate Sharon representing PBOT here tonight. Sharon, did you have anything you wanted to say before we close out?
No, I don't think so. Not if anybody, I was just here to answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Cassie, Mike, as always, a pleasure. Thank you for joining us this evening, and you're welcome to stick around if you want, but we fully understand if you want to skate out and have that nice cocktail at the end of your day. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll turn it over to Bryan now.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. Thank you, everyone. See you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah, and I feel like we should be having champagne or something for your last hurrah here. Sorry we can't be in person to celebrate, but yeah, I'll echo what others have said. It's great to have worked with you. Not as long as others, but wish you all the best. Let me work on sharing my screen. Are you all seeing that? Yeah. So just wanted to give you a quick update on where we're at with the regional flexible funds allocation process for the 2025 to 2027 grant cycle. This is how we get a lot of funding for our projects. It's how sort of the MPO Metro takes in a lot of federal funding and then allocates it to different jurisdictions throughout the metro area. And so we're already working on the applications for the cycle that's going to fund projects in 2025 to 2027. So it seems like it's a long ways away, but these things come pretty quickly. And to give a little bit of background about sort of where we're at with the process, we do need to submit these applications fairly quickly, coming up in February of next year. As I mentioned, they're generally programmed for 2025 to 27. Oftentimes, though, just for various reasons, they actually take longer than that. And we typically get about half of the amount for the entire region, which is $45 million. But there's a wrinkle or sort of a good thing that's coming out this year with the new infrastructure bill. There is the potential that the way that Metro sort of allocates that money is just boosting the number of REF applications that are accepted in sort of this coming cycle. We're sort of trying to anticipate and work and talk to Metro about what that could look like. But typically each project is about $5 million to $10 million. We do have a match, and the projects need to be in either the regional active transportation or freight network in the regional transportation plan, and also have to be in the constrained project list from that transportation plan. So not all projects, we can't just kind of come up with the project out of thin air. It has to be based on that list. Also they use federal funding. So sometimes just if we're doing something unique, it's just might not be the right source of funding to do that type of project. So just in terms of how we sort of went about selecting candidate projects, as we mentioned, it sort of has to be the right size of project in terms of how much it would cost, where we're at with the time frame, and then the type of project. We do some feasibility analysis and sort of need to develop it up to have cost estimates. There is a benefit to having community support for these projects. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But looking at projects that really fill major gaps or deficiencies in our network, especially the active transportation network, wanted to make sure it meets our goals for both climate and equity. Looking at safety and yeah, as I mentioned, equity as well. So I have just I guess one more slide. We did do sort of PBOT staff did a scan of the RTP, looking at what projects would fit that criteria, and have done some initial analysis and sharing out with different modal committees, and have also evaluated some of these candidate projects with Metro and looking at their criteria. And so we're now in the process of developing some sort of more detailed concepts and using those to develop cost estimates that we would then submit for the application. And I think I have a map here that's going to show this better, but these are the list of projects. And you can see they sort of are spread out throughout the Portland area. And I'll talk about 80 seconds. It's sort of unique in this, but otherwise we have a variety of projects. The Cornfoot Road, for example, is both multi-use path and a sort of a freight improvement project. Some of these are more sort of focused on safety. You can see there's a variety of sort of lengths and detail. I'm going to focus tonight on 148th. I can do my best to answer questions about these other projects, but really I've been working on most closely on 148th. And just to sort of I'm going to run through these very quickly and can come back, but we do, as I mentioned, sort of an analysis of looking at various metrics. So this is looking at our sort of the equity matrix that we have. It looks at both sort of racial diversity and income, sort of high proportions of low income residents. That helps guide our work. Also looking at safety. So the orange lines are our high crash network. And you can see a lot of projects, if they're not on the high crash network, they do cross multiple streets on that high crash network. And so addressing some of the issues that we see there. And I should note that the reason why we don't have more on the high crash network is actually because we're doing a lot of projects that a lot of them are already funded to improve many of these corridors, Stark, Division. We've done a lot of work on these recently, or they're funded. And then this just shows the regional sort of our centers and corridors throughout the city, and also sort of how those projects overlap with those. And so focusing more on 148th, sort of why are we looking here? It is, there are high equity benefits, and it serves both the Rosewood and Division neighborhood centers. And it also, there's a new bus line planned for 148th. And we've been working with TriMet to sort of better understand, and we think this could really complement sort of when that service could come online is with the improvements with this project. We have in the transportation system plan, both 148th has high both pedestrian and bike classifications, and it's in the regional transportation plan. And it will, I say it will build, yes, it will build on a major safety upgrade at Stark and 148th, which is another project I'm working on for the Safer Outer Stark project. And we've already done a lot of the project development work. You'll see some of the concepts I have on this corridor, and then just working to also improve some of the assets that are that are deficient along the corridor, both signals and then a lot of ramps. And you'll see here, I will note that we're showing here the concept from Gleason to Division. This says Powell to Gleason. That's a typo. It should say Division to Gleason. But there is the opportunity, because I'll get into that in a minute, but we're looking at whether that could be shifted, and I want to get your feedback on that. But as I'm sure you're familiar with the street, but just wanted to do a little bit of existing conditions just to show that there are some variations where it goes from 3 lanes down to 2 lanes. So there's in most places, there's a center median or center turn lane, but it is constrained in certain places. We've done some good debatable, but I think most people are getting used to the intersection of 148th and Division. As we've done some counts and have seen an increase in pedestrian and bike activity. I don't have sort of the crash and safety data yet, but that is sort of constructed. This was last summer when it was still under construction. And then Stark and 148th, which I mentioned, is going to be going through an upgrade in the future. So what we had in the sort of scope is protected bike lanes, pedestrian crossings that would fill sort of the gaps in the where we have spacing gaps, but stop improvements to support that future bus service, and then the protected intersection. We've since made revisions, so we're adding a beacon to the crossing at Grant, and also a signal rebuild at Mill, and have removed Stark and 148th to include in the Safe Router Stark project. That was a really high cost item, and so because we're removing that and adding that to the Safe Router Stark project, we do now think that we can extend protected bike lanes. So probably not sidewalk and other crossings, but protected bike lanes north to Halsey along the golf course, and then most likely south to Powell as well. And we're trying to get to this sort of sweet spot of around $10 million. We think that if it's too high above that, it'll sort of lose its competitiveness. But we want to make sure that we can get as much funded as possible. And I will note sort of candidly that internally we think just if Metro is using the same scoring criteria as they did last time, that this project probably has the highest chance of being funded of any of those projects that I showed earlier. So we're excited about the potential here. And just to show sort of, this is a rough drawing. I think I have a better drawing of some of what those islands could look like. Yeah, so you can see here.
Bryan,
yeah.
Before you go any further, Carol, you had a question? You're muted, Carol. Carol, you're muted.
Maybe I'll just wait until Bryan's done with his presentation,
Okay.
and then I have quite a few questions for him.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've only got one more slide, or one or two. But just wanted to sort of show what that would look like on the ground. Again, this is a concept that's still being refined, but in general, it's enhancing the bike lanes. So they would be protected where possible, but also maintaining, there's still some pretty high parking utilization. And so maintaining parking on one side of the street, except where we have to sort of narrow it to add this refuge island and crossing. So this is showing at Cooch and 148th, just as an example of what that would look like. But also having these bus stops with 80 landing pads. So understanding of what that looks like. And as in terms of where we're at and next steps, as I mentioned, we're still refining the costs, and then we'll come back hopefully and share out a more detailed concept and cost. And then ideally we would be at that point requesting a letter of support the more letters of support we can get for these projects, make them more competitive, both among the other projects in the city, but also just in terms of the sort of metro scoring in general. So, and then, yeah, sort of over this winter, once we have the better cost estimates and concept, I'll also be working on actually writing the grant to get the money. So I think that's all I've got. I'll leave this up for a minute in case we want to go back to a certain slide, but
I'm coming from the perspective that we have been asked by some of the bicycling advocates to do some advocating for some other trails work and stuff. But I think I need more general information on these RFFA grants. And so is PBOT the only entity that's submitting applications for these grants, or do other Portland bureaus can submit applications? Can you give me a little more background on that?
Yeah, I think it's gotten a little more confusing this cycle because I believe that the the bond measure for parks and some of the trails funding is using the RFFA application process to also get applications for those projects.
Mm-hmm.
And Parks and Recreation is the one leading that effort. So
okay,
I don't believe it's not the same pot of funding.
Right.
It's the same sort of application cycle. And so
I see.
It's a little bit more confusing this time, whereas typically those would be separate.
So there's a separate pot of money reserved for trails and things than these projects that you've been working on.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So
okay.
Sometimes, in the past, for example, I know we've done an application for there's a Springwater Trail connector that has been, we've applied for multiple times and it's failed multiple times. And so I think finally
yeah, down in Selwood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm probably one of the few bikers in the that I'm in these meetings with. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And the project on Cornfoot Road, you know, I've biked along Marine Drive a lot and stuff, and we go down into that area a lot just to get to businesses and stuff. But is there really a destination that people are going on that Cornfoot Road path? I know that it ties in with that 47th Avenue protected bike path that you recently did, but what's at the other end there of Cornfoot?
I'm going to chip in, Carol. There are a number of businesses just off Cornfoot on Alderwood that a lot of bikers use Cornfoot to get down to. One of them is the new postal facility on Alderwood. The other one is the FedEx facility right across the street, which leads into, and I hate to steal your thunder here, Carol, but I want to just kind of sidetrack on this one since you said Cornfoot, you opened the door for me.
Okay.
The original RFFA for Cornfoot also had a leg on Alderwood to improve Alderwood, and I'm going to put the bug in your ear, Bryan. The road is sloughing more and more on Alderwood as it crosses that little leg of the slough. It sloughs off. There's no sidewalk. People can't get from 82nd to Cornfoot easily because there is no sidewalk. So I would like to see, if you're going to talk about Cornfoot, I would like to see the funding for Alderwood put back in to make it a complete corridor. So that's my comment.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been asked to advocate for the Park Rose Gap of the Marine Drive trail, which is really a worthwhile thing to do. And so I was just wondering how much your projects would conflict with that.
No conflict, and we're in support and talking to Friends of 40 Mile Loop, and
okay.
yeah, we're just trying our best to stay in our lane and let Parks and Recreation sort of lead that. But yeah, that's.
And also another comment on the 148 that, I think it's great that you're beefing up that road and stuff. But north of that, we do a lot of biking in the neighborhoods that are south of just south of I-84. So that would be Park Rose Heights, Russell, and what's the next one?
Wilkes.
It's Wilkes above and below the freeway.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, where Summer Place is. And 148 is absolutely enormous to try to cross in those areas. And they are, PBOT is supposed to be putting a crossing in up there, but it's not supposed to be signaled. And I think there's a good case to be made for that. I don't know if you'd have any money to add the signaling of that crossing in there, but we would appreciate it because it is a, it's a great place to bike. And kids are going to school too, to cross that street.
I'll bring that back to our team to talk about it. I know that we were looking at extending this to Halsey and stopping there because we know there's funded improvements north of Halsey, but that might be something we want to think about is beefing up some of those improvements even more with this funding.
Yeah, from my perspective, the crossings are almost more important than the protected bike lanes on those busy streets. Because I don't bike on the busy streets unless I have to.
Yeah.
Okay, and thank you, Carol. And David, you've been very patient. Go ahead with your question.
All right, I was having a little bit of trouble unmuting. So I'm pretty familiar with the RFFA process, having gotten some similar projects in past years through the process. So comments on 148th. I'm glad to see that you're looking at Market Street as a cross there because that's a major bikeway. But I will have to advocate for Main Street, which is a direct link to David Douglas High School. And even though it's a minor street, narrow, no sidewalks to speak of, I would encourage you to enhance at least the crossing there in case the city ever upgrades Main Street in that area. The thing about 148th is, I think about 10 years ago, 3 cyclists were killed there while riding along the streets when they were hit by a car with a drunk driver, of course, with a long record. But so putting in protected bike lanes on 148th is really a safety issue. It doesn't actually have a lot of traffic. And of course, the street was built wide to connect with the I-80 freeway that was never built. And that's why it's so absurdly wide. But it's never had much traffic. And from your photos, it shows that virtually nobody's really parking on the street, which encourages drivers who are on the street to go very, very fast, way above the speed limit. And so I would encourage you to figure out ways to encourage people to go slower. Speed limits obviously don't work. Narrowing the lanes would help, the travel lanes. But I think also you need to have some protection for bicyclists and pedestrians along the street because of the fast drivers. I do know that 148th is in the middle of probably one of the poorest areas of the city, which means, of course, as you said, it's very likely to get funding no matter really what design you have and how expensive it is, because other jurisdictions will want to fund their projects in the rich areas of town. And in order to justify that, they'll fund this project to make up for the lack of diversity in their areas of town. And that's what they did on, what was it? The projects on the 150s and the 110s bike routes, and also the 130s. So I do appreciate the RFFA process and how East Portland could usually benefit quite a bit from those, especially when East Portland wants a difficult or expensive or controversial project to get completed to do that. I do have a question. Is there the potential bike bridge on 132nd crossing I-84? Is that in the TSP?
No.
How do we
it's
get
not.
it into the TSP? Because it's already in the EPIM.
Correct. It's in the EPIM, but it's not in the TSP.
Okay, how does, for the next round of RFFA and what was it, 2027 through 2030, it'd be good to get that project funded or through pork barrel money, since they're doing pork barrel again. That's really how you get that kind of a project funded, because that would be a great link for connecting northeast Portland to the rest of East Portland.
And
Thank you.
Arlene has a question. If you were through, David. Okay, go ahead.
All right, now, we have a number of designated bikeways, the 100s, the 130s, the 150s, the HOP. All of them are in various stages of incompleteness because they don't have enough money to finish them. And yet, none of them appear on this RFF process. I find it difficult to say, yeah, we're actually doing something for East Portland when you've all got these pieces that are hanging on, not being complete. The people who cycle regularly want them done. And we've been asking, per Mr. Cassie, why can't they get finished? So I'm going to ask you, why can't they get finished? And I understand that there's a limited amount of money, but if none of them ever get on anybody's list to finish, they will still remain in the state of incompleteness. And all it is a useless designation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't have all the information about all those neighborhood greenways in the process, but I will sort of circle back to, this needing to be both identified in the RTP and also the sort of right scale of project between $5 and $10 sort of $1 million. These are bigger projects than some of the sort of neighborhood greenway projects. I don't know sort of what the funding issues are there. But sort of to David's point as well, I think if we're looking at doing sort of an EPIM 2 in the near future, that could be a way that we could both reevaluate some of the projects that are unfunded and also getting those into future, the update of the RTP.
I want to say that it's not you, all right? But we were lied to about getting those projects funded. So I think you ought to take back to your superiors that this is not a happy camper. Thank you.
And you feel like you were lied to about the 130s Greenway, or can you be a little bit more specific so I can share with them?
All of them were supposed to get started, get seed funding, and none of that has happened. Money was diverted to division. Money, frankly, I believe was diverted to NATO Parkway, all $11.4 million of a fluff. And we get people still dying on our streets. I feel very strongly that we've been left hanging. Thank you. And yet you want to do climate action? Let's do climate action where it counts. The people who start in the neighborhood and move up and down.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And Carol, did you have another question?
Well, I just had some more comments about that. One of the other trails that show up pretty significantly in our area on the metro, they have this trails series of maps where they evaluate them for different criteria, and there's a link along Fremont between Gateway, Green Park, you know, and the multi-use path there on I-205 and 122nd Avenue. And, you know, what makes that so not such a desirable project is what it links into, which is that horrible section of the I-84 bike path between 122nd and 148th. It's like the death tunnel, you know, you'd feel totally unsafe biking on it. And also the crossings at 122nd, 148th, and I think there's an additional, I don't know whether it's 162nd or 181st. Beyond there, that whole sort of region could be looked at in more detail to see what the feasible alternatives and the least cost solution would be in getting biking paths and pedestrian paths through those underpasses and things. And that might be an alternative to doing a bridge over the freeway. Okay.
Mhm. That's a good thought. Anyone else have thoughts about that?
And, you know, that's just my thoughts on it. You know, we bike the neighborhoods just to stay away from unsafe trails. And so for now, the crossings are the most important things.
Right. And to Carol, to add on to your point, you were looking for the crossings on 148th north of Halsey. Steve Sigathy and part of the PBOT crew are doing the sidewalk extensions through from 132nd to 162nd on Halsey. And they're also doing north of Halsey on 148th. There is a crossing at the school there.
Yeah, it's like Sacramento or something.
Yeah, yeah, and the one at Sacramento. And PBOT basically said no, there was not going to be an RFB there because they're they're decreasing the lanes to one each way, so they don't feel that there needs to be an RFB. Personally, my personal feeling is yet again, this is another example of East Portland being treated differently than the rest of Portland. We have numerous examples of schools that have two lanes, one each way, that have RFBs, but yet East Portland can't get one in front of a grade school.
And when they presented it, they had a picture of the kids running across the street. And
running across the street.
Yeah, that's probably why they're running across the street, because there's no signal there. So, you know, it's right near a school, so it's worthy of getting attention.
The RFB. So Brian, you can take that comment back as well. These are examples that we see daily, weekly, monthly, how we're treated differently than the higher income brackets of Portland. You know, we don't live in a bubble out here. We do travel. We do see how people are treated differently across the region. And it's an apples to apples comparison in many, many cases. And David, I see you have a question. Go ahead.
So when you're putting together the application for the 148th project, Bryan, there was a study done by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, must have been about 10 years ago, Tyler Bump did, of where people in East Portland commute to versus inner Portland. So very few people in East Portland at that time, and I suspect it's probably still true, were actually commuting to downtown. They were generally trying to get to jobs along the Columbia corridor in Clackamas County and in Clark County, whereas people in inner Portland were generally trying to commute to downtown. So 148th being a north-south street, and you could do this for the Cornfoot as well, and the Alberta project, is that commuters, including bicycle commuters in East Portland, are trying to get to the Columbia corridor, and this project would enhance that, as with those other projects. they're not wanting to pass through inner Portland for a variety of reasons, but to use the same corridors as they use to drive to get to their jobs. So you could use it in terms of employment as well as education. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that study, point out that you're trying to create large bike routes that connect employees to jobs in the Columbia corridor, and you know, tie it in with the Postal Service and FedEx, as you say, as well as the recent projects that they completed. I think it was on 47th. And so you know, tie that all in, and I think you would have quite a good application.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know there's a big focus on getting people to safely to jobs in the Columbia corridor.
Correct. So you're making enhancements, and you know, the most important enhancements are usually at intersections rather than along straightaways. But it is very reassuring to anybody who's bicycling or walking to be in a safe environment where they're not worried about a car hitting them from behind. You know, accidents, or excuse me, crashes that involve bicycles, cars hitting bicycles from behind, are statistically rare, but that's never reassuring to an actual bicyclist. You're constantly worried about that. And so it's good to think about how people bicycling can get from East Portland to jobs in the Columbia corridor, or in Subi Islands, or in Clark County, or Clackamas County, and trying to tie in those projects that get people to where they want to go.
That's a great point. Yeah, and there's you know, it's interesting. This is an aside, but we've been looking at our scooter and bike share data, and more so scooter data, because bike share is not all the way out in East Portland yet. But there's a lot of people using scooters on 122nd. I mean, I think, you know, and 148th, if we had safe infrastructure, you know, I think would be similar. And they're going long distances on scooters. So I think that's a proxy for the, you know, sort of the demand for that. And I just also wanted to flag, David, in response to your question, I didn't want to misspeak, so I looked it up. And we do have a funded project at Main and 148th already that's going to enhance that crossing. So so hopefully that will, I can't find the design. It's not part of the design that I have, but we should be enhancing that. So hopefully that's why that wasn't included.
Okay.
And one other thing I forgot to mention is that the 82nd project, so the one I showed, is we've dropped that for now from the pool of applications, really because of the jurisdictional transfer. We have funding that we think we can make those improvements sooner than 2025. So
great, thank you. All right, Bryan, thank you for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
And we're right at about 15 minutes to go. Seeing no more questions, we'll move on to the very last agenda item this evening, and that is elections. Specifically elections for my seat and the vice chair. Would anyone like to run? Connie, Carol, Robin? Connie, just shake your head or nod your head. No. Carol?
I've kind of taken on the parks thing, and you know, I'm kind of maxing out right now, although me and several other people in the Hazelwood Neighborhood Association are very interested in all these transportation things. So
Okay.
I will pass along, well, and Arlene's sitting there. So, you know, we'll pass along, you know, information to them as possible.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Carol. Robin Castro, would you like to run for a chair or vice chair seat?
I'm gonna hang out for a little bit before I try that.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Having no one currently present at the meeting, And as this is our last meeting of the year, Arlene has graciously volunteered, should there have been no interest, and seeing no interest, Arlene will be the new chair of the East Portland Land Use and Transportation Committee. This does not, however, preclude any late applications for vice chair. I know that Arlene is very busy with all of the other hats that she wears, and she will be actively seeking a vice chair. I'm sure in her in inimitable way, she will succeed in finding a vice chair. So with that, we've got 10 minutes to go. JR, thank you as always for recording and providing the support for the meeting. David, it's always great to see you at these meetings from so very far away. Connie, it's always great to have your input. Bryan, it's always wonderful to have your ear so you can take things back to the higher ups at PBOT. And with that, I will say thank you very much for allowing me to advocate for you and for East Portland, lo these many years that I've been doing it. But unfortunately, it is time for me to move on with my life. It's, like I said, bittersweet, and I hate to do it. And if I had another 30 years, I still wouldn't be able to get everything done that I would like to see done out here in East Portland. So I am grateful for what I was able to get done and what I was able to advocate for. And I will continue to be a part of the East Portland community, and will keep myself abreast of things that happen. And if we do Zoom meeting for forever and a day, I will probably pop into Zoom meetings from time to time. So with that.
No,
Yep.
everybody unmute and clap. Thank you so much, Doug, for all of the work that you've done. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
You will be missed. We will know that you will have a wonderful time as you pack up your house and move out of Portland and into northern Idaho.
Right. Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Doug-
everyone.
Doug, before we leave. I'm gonna
Yes,
stop the
JR.
recording.